You have learned about the respiratory system. Arrange these parts according to the sequence of the flow of air when we breathe in. Drag the parts to the correct boxes. Very good! When we breathe in, the air flows through our nasal cavity, the trachea, the bronchus, and into our lungs. In this unit, you are going to learn about the process by which oxygen is transported from the alveoli to cells throughout the body. At the end of this unit, you should be able to answer the following questions. How does the oxygen from our alveoli get diffused into the blood capillaries? In which way does blood transport oxygen? How does the oxygen from our blood capillaries get diffused into our cells? The oxygen that we breathe travels through the respiratory system into our lungs. However, do you know where the oxygen goes? Click on Zoom button to view where the oxygen goes. How does oxygen enter the bloodstream through the alveoli? Let's take a closer look at one of the alveoli. What do you see? If you observe carefully, you can see the blood capillaries in the alveoli. Oxygen diffuses across the membrane of the alveoli, alveolar membrane, through a thin fluid layer into the blood capillary. Within this capillary, the dissolved oxygen diffuses into red blood cells. When the oxygen concentration in the alveolus is higher than in the blood, oxygen is diffused into the capillary and is picked up by hemoglobin in the red blood cells. What do you think helps the alveoli diffuse oxygen efficiently? Click on the label areas to find out how they can help the alveoli diffuse oxygen efficiently. The alveoli are surrounded by a large network of blood capillaries. There are approximately 300 to 400 million alveoli in each lung. This creates a large surface area equivalent to the size of a tennis court. The alveoli cell wall is only 1 cell thick. The alveoli are surrounded by a thin moisture film that helps to dissolve oxygen. Now that you have seen how oxygen is dissolved into our blood, how do you think the oxygen is transported by the blood to all parts of our body? In our blood, the oxygen is diffused into the hemoglobin in our red blood cells. Once the oxygen is diffused into the hemoglobin, it combines with hemoglobin and forms oxyhemoglobin. The blood with oxyhemoglobin is known as oxygenated blood. How is the oxygenated blood transported to all over the body? The oxygenated blood is taken to the heart through the pulmonary veins. The heart pumps the blood out through the aorta into the arteries that supply all parts of body with oxygenated blood. The arteries branch out into capillaries which carry the blood to the target cells or the cells that need the oxygen. Now that you know how the oxygenated blood reaches the cells in our body, how do you think the cells get the oxygen? Once the oxygenated blood reaches the cells, the oxyhemoglobin will release oxygen and becomes hemoglobin again. The released oxygen diffuses through the walls of the blood capillaries and into the cells. The oxyhemoglobin, which is bright red, becomes purplish red once the oxygen has been released. What does the cell do with the oxygen? Once the oxygen reaches the cell, the process of cell respiration takes place. During cell respiration, oxygen and glucose are being used to produce carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Let's simulate how oxygenated and deoxygenated blood travels through the body. Arrange the classroom following the diagram on screen. Place 2 students each at the heart, lungs, and other parts of the body. Give a deck of red cards to one student in the lungs. Give another deck of blue cards to the other student in the lungs. Do the same for the students placed at the other parts of the body. The red cards will represent oxygen-rich blood. The blue cards will represent oxygen-poor blood. All the other students in the class will pretend that they are red blood cells. As the students pass through the lungs and other parts of the body, the students will have to figure out what cards they should receive. As you move through the circulatory system, answer these questions. Where does blood get oxygenated? Where does blood get deoxygenated? What is the role of the heart? Which blood vessel carries oxygenated blood? Which blood vessel carries deoxygenated blood? Click on the correct option. This part of the alveolus helps to diffuse oxygen through the alveolar membranes. A thin moisture film helps to diffuse oxygen through the alveolar membranes. Click on the correct option. Which of the following is responsible in pumping oxygenated blood to all parts of the body? Very good. Our heart pumps oxygenated blood throughout the body. Click on the correct option. Which of the following statements is false? Very good. Alveoli is covered with just a thin film of moisture to help in gas diffusion. Click on the correct option. Is the following true or false? The function of the lungs is to diffuse oxygen into the blood and absorb carbon dioxide from the blood. Correct. The statement is true. Click on the correct option. Is the following true or false? The function of the heart is to create oxyhemoglobin. Correct. The statement is false. Oxygen is diffused into the blood capillaries through a thin film of moisture on the alveolar walls. The diffusion is also made easy by the difference in concentrations of oxygen between air in the alveolus and the blood and the thin walls of the alveoli. The transport of oxygen in the blood is made possible by hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a red pigment in red blood cells that can combine with oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin, which is then transported around the body by the blood. Oxygenated blood is pumped to all parts of the body by the heart. When it reaches the blood capillaries, the oxygen in the red blood cell is diffused through the capillary wall into our cells. The thin film of moisture on the alveolar wall helps to dissolve oxygen. Click true or false. That is not correct. Click on true or false. The concentration of oxygen in the alveolus does not help in diffusing oxygen into the blood. That is incorrect. Click on the correct option. Why are the capillaries on the alveolus only 1 cell thick? That is correct. Being close to the alveolus helps to diffuse oxygen faster and easier through the thin layer into the red blood cells. Click on the correct option. What does the combination of oxygen and hemoglobin produce? Oxyhemoglobin is produced when hemoglobin combines with oxygen. Click on the correct option. Which of these statements is false? That is correct. Hemoglobin combines with oxygen, not carbon dioxide, to form oxyhemoglobin. Can you answer these questions? How does the oxygen from our alveoli get diffused into the blood capillaries? Once oxygen that we breathe reaches the alveoli in our lungs, the oxygen is diffused through the thin alveolar wall. A thin film of moisture around the alveoli also helps to diffuse oxygen more efficiently. Within these capillaries, the oxygen goes into the red blood cells. Red blood cells contain red pigment called hemoglobin. When hemoglobin combines with oxygen, it becomes oxyhemoglobin. The oxygen from our blood capillaries gets diffused into our cells. The diffusion of oxygen into our cells occurs in the same way oxygen is diffused in the lungs. In the blood capillaries, oxygenated blood releases oxygen to the tissue or cell through the thin walls of the capillary. High blood pressure over long periods of time may weaken the walls of blood vessels or capillaries. A brain hemorrhage occurs when the weakened wall of a blood vessel or capillaries in the brain ruptures or bursts. Blood may leak into or around the brain tissue. What happens when the brain suffers a hemorrhage? Let's observe a brain that is developing a hemorrhage. What do you think happens to the cells in the part of the brain affected by the hemorrhage? What happens to brain cells that do not receive oxygen because blood cannot reach them? Discuss with your friends the effects of a brain hemorrhage on a person. Would an athlete perform better if their cells received more oxygen? Would the cells in an athlete's body produce more energy if more oxygen is supplied to it? Some international athletes resort to an illegal practice known as blood doping to increase their performance. Your assignment is to investigate and write a report on blood doping. Discuss with your friends why international sports bodies have banned blood doping.